It's time to rip the cover off what really works to ditch addiction, depression, anger, anxiety, and all other kinds of human suffering. No, not sobriety. We're talking the F word here, freedom. We'll share straight from the trenches what we've learned from leaving our own addictions behind and coaching hundreds of others to do the same. And since it's such a heavy topic, we might as well have a good time while we're at it. And welcome back. We're going to continue this week with the same stuff we started with last week. We're going to continue with the story of Dr. Klopfer as he returns to this hospital, because there's a certain event in it that I want to bring to the surface. Last week we talked about other people's opinion and living up to other people's opinion and what that might do to deteriorate the system and a simple method of starting to do that. Now, obviously, if you want some help with that, I promise, there's over 1,000 people we've helped learn these skills so that they can go into their life and cease to be controlled by not just the opinion of people in the present, but also people in the past, something that happened that they just can't get over. Whether that's decades of trauma or anything else, those things can be let go of, and you can live free of it. Well, in the course of his studies, there was one case that that Dr. Klopfer was really, really confused about, and he relayed the entire thing in his publication on the topic in 1957. There was a man by the name of Mr. Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T. He was clearly a wealthy man because he owned an airplane, a private plane and whatnot, and used to take rides in this plane. But he had been in the hospital for quite a time dealing with some of the end stages of lymphosarcoma, cancer, like massive grapefruit-sized tumors inside of his thoracic cavity, and all of these other things going on. The doctors were looking at him thinking, okay, cool, he has some, just a couple years to live. I mean, not a couple years, but a couple weeks to live at best. He's really at the end of his game. He's just limp in bed. He hasn't been there for a while. He's just they've tried every kind of possible medication and treatment and everything else, and nothing is working. Well, this Mr. Wright is sitting there in bed. His doctor's name was Dr. Philip West. And he's laying there in his bed, and he overheard some of the staff talking about some medical trials that were going to be happening at that particular hospital, chosen from among many, of a new drug that this patient, Mr. Wright, had read about or heard about called Krebiosen. Now, this drug was purportedly one that would eradicate cancer, that they had high hopes for this. And he had done all the research he could. He had read up as much as he could while he was lying there in bed. He'd found out all the things that he could about it. Obviously, it was little. It was minimal. But the man was a man of means and had access to some sorts of information. And when he heard that this hospital was going to be doing the testing for 12 patients only, he begged and pleaded his doctor, Dr. Philip West, to include him in the trials. Now, he did qualify for a lot of the trials, but there was one qualification that Mr. Wright lacked, and that is he needed to have a prognosis or an estimate of life of over 3 months, meaning he needed to be able to survive long enough for them to look back at the tests. And so if any of them had a prognosis of less than 3 months, then they were to be disqualified from the test. But this didn't deter Mr. Wright. He kept begging and pleading the doctor to please include him in this study. And he was so persuasive that finally the doctor somewhat relented. He said, against his better judgment, and he thought, this guy's going to die anyway, and then we'll just use the rest of the injections for another person that they'll select. And so this was on a Friday, and they did their first injections on a Friday, and the doctor went home. And when he came back on Monday, instead of seeing Mr. Wright laying there languidly in bed, Mr. Wright was actually up, out of bed, and he hadn't been out of bed for a long time. He was wandering around the hospital. He was spreading good cheer among the patients, and the doctor was absolutely flabbergasted. He thought, wow, maybe this is a really incredible drug. So he ran around to all the other 11 patients to check them, and not a single one of them had shown any sign of improvement. In fact, a couple of them had gotten worse. And so he comes back very, very confused, not sure why it's the case that Mr. Wright is doing so well. And he looks at all his charts, they take another thing, and what he noticed is not only is he doing well on the outside, but the cancerous tumors had started to melt, as he called it, like snowballs on a hot stove. So he's not talking about, oh, they're slowly degrading. He's using the metaphor of snowballs on a hot stove. Whatever imaging he's using to see these tumors, it's showing that they are rapidly disappearing, to the point where within a short time, maybe it was another week or two, Mr. Wright was able to be fully discharged with zero symptoms at all that he had been in the hospital with for so long of his disease, and was able to be sent home. He had subsequently gone about his regular life, had joined his normal activities, was flying around in his private plane, and really thoroughly enjoying himself with absolutely zero problems, flying up to 12,000 feet, not an issue. Then a couple months later, there's a news brief that says that the clinical trials of Krebbiozin have failed. It is not a drug. It doesn't look good, like it will actually help with cancer, like the researchers have thought it would. And within a day or two, Mr. Wright checks himself back into the hospital with all the same symptoms that he had the first time. All the same symptoms. The tumors were back. Everything was back. The fluid exchanges, all of the medical symptoms were back, and he had checked himself back into the hospital, and with the same symptoms. And Dr. West was a little bit kind of confused about this, but he had his suspicions. He's like, what is going on here? And he wanted to figure out if he was right. His suspicion was that this was the placebo effect in operation. Right now, I don't know that it was named the placebo effect at the time. That might have come about later, but he suspected there was something going on with this man's attitude toward things. And so this doctor, in good faith, absolutely and abjectly lied to his patient. He decided he was going to perform a little bit of quack medicine, also because there had been a lot of quack medicine about. As you may recall, Dr. Keeley, who was the one that spread the notion that addiction was a disease in the first place so well and with such propaganda, particularly alcoholism, but then other addictions as well. Because of his propaganda, he had really gotten that idea into the public mind, even though there's still no conclusive evidence about that. And in fact, most evidence points the opposite direction. But of course, all research can be proven false. All research findings can be proven false, both mathematically and in just practice, because they just tend to be reflections of the current bias of the time, both how the research is made, the constraints on it, what people are looking for, the kinds of things they control for. All that stuff is a reflection of the current way of thinking at the time. And I've seen a pretty prominent article by somebody inside of the health industry where he detailed this in a paper, and his paper, the whole point of his research and his analysis of all of these things was to show that 100% of research findings are actually false, that they might be good indicators of places to look, that they're very useful in spreading information sometimes, but that in reality, all of them are false findings. So we come back to this situation. Dr. West is looking at this, and he knows about these quack medicines. Dr. Keeley, the one with the addiction stuff, he had been using bichloride of gold in his stuff. But when they looked at his tinctures, they found no gold in it. So perhaps he had used it in the beginning, and it had proved very toxic to the human system, and so they stopped using it. These were things he got from alchemical texts and things from the Renaissance, from Paracelsus, the father of toxicology and whatnot. And so he had been testing them out on his own, and he used this claim about total cure when in fact that wasn't happening, though there are some bits of the therapy that may have actually been very, very helpful, depending on how you wanted to look at it. But it was all propaganda. And so Dr. West was like, how are these quack medicine doctors making so much money off of this stuff and getting people to, and having it work? Because it can't be doubted that people are getting better with quack medicine doctors, because they hadn't understood the placebo effect. They hadn't understood the biology of belief. They hadn't understood how your thoughts are directly linked to the tissues of your body. And this is something I go deeply into in the retreats. And I'm trying to help people not just learn it like book style or learn from a podcast, but their body suddenly grasps the connection. And all of a sudden, their ability to change enhances manyfold. I mentioned the guy who's even his egg allergy had started to go away within just a couple of days of being at the retreat. It's not because he was even talking about allergies, but suddenly his body starts getting better because his mind starts getting better. So the direct link is there, and I'm giving people a physical experience with it. So Dr. West, what he does is he lies to Mr. Wright, and he tells him, no, that only happens because these people who had been performing that had left the Krebiosin out, and when it's left standing for a long time, it deteriorates. But he says, I have a new double strength batch that's coming in that's super refined, and we will just make sure that we're using it as it comes in without allowing it to stand. And so this gets Mr. Wright super excited, like, oh, okay, maybe it was just one bad strain of it. And because he's excited, well, the doctor wanted to be sure that the excitement was raised to a certain pitch. So he said, it's coming in a few days. Now, there was no super refined formula. There was no extra addition. All the medical clinical trials had been cut off, like they were done. There was nothing else that was going on. This was the doctor completely lying to him. So then in a couple of days, Mr. Wright comes back in, and Dr. West makes a big show of giving him this injection and making sure he knows it's all great. All the injection was either a saline solution with salt water, or it was just straight up distilled water or purified water. I don't remember which one. It's injected into the system, and this time within 2 days, Mr. Wright's system is completely clear of all the tumors. Now, these were real tumors. You could touch them. They were bulging from the skin, like you could see them on x-rays. This wasn't like something that was made up by the person, like a hypochondriac. This was 100% a very real situation. And again, within just a couple of days, they completely vanished, completely melted away. And Mr. Wright was checked out within a couple of days more, and he was sent home and again went to live on an incredibly powerful life. Enjoying his later years, enjoying all the things he had with no symptoms whatsoever until that is, a final article was released declaring that every single strain and batch and variety of Krebiosin was found to be completely unhelpful in the fight against cancer. Within a short amount of time, a couple of days, Mr. Wright is checked back into the hospital with the same symptoms as before. Nothing can prevent him from believing that it's now terminal, and he died within a week. This is the placebo effect in reverse. It's called the nocebo effect, meaning I will injure, as opposed to I will please. Something that's noxious is related to that. So we have a situation here where the mind, in his case, both created health and created disease. We're not talking about personality anymore. We're not talking about whether you're trying to be a good person anymore. We're just talking about straight up the way that your mind thinks.
If you or someone you know is looking to drop the F-bomb of freedom in their life, whether that's from past trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, or any other host of emotional and personal struggles, but they just don't know how or want some help doing it, head on over to thefreedomspecialist.com/feelbetternow and check out some of the things we've got in store for you, or book a call so we can look at your unique situation and get you the help that you're looking for.
The way that your mind thinks, what it believes to be the truth about reality, is creating your experience in your body 100% of the time. There have been many men who I've worked with who, they've been struggling with pornography for years, or something happened in their marriage. And, during their marriage, or they had an affair, whatever, the wife or the husband, being oblivious, they might have picked up on different things about how the person was acting and might be weird about it, but being oblivious, they don't know about it. As soon as they know, I've heard so many of them then turn around and mentally recreate in their mind the past however many years of marriage as if it was all a sham and all a lie, and everything else was like horrible and miserable. And then they start to suffer as if that was the case. The reality is, yes, there was plenty of lying happening, but there was also plenty of truth-telling happening. There were plenty of genuine moments of love and joy and peace and enjoyment and hope and all the things. Yes, the person was lying to them. Yes, politicians lie to you all the time. Yes, like marketers are not 100% truthful. They don't share everything with you all the time, because sometimes that's just not worth it. You don't need to know all the features of the vehicle and how it's put together in order to make a decision about whether or not you want to buy the vehicle. So yes, there are things that have been held back. And yes, I'm not saying that they should be held back. What I am saying is it's very often that I see a person who suddenly discovers something about their relationship, and then all of a sudden they turn that relationship in their own mind. All their memories get poisoned And then they live inside this poison instead of recognizing that, okay, that was happening. And they still had all of those powerful, profound, amazing memories. Those all still happened. You can't take those away either. But instead, when they believe that, then they start to experience it that way. So that's on a psychological level. This also happens with health, as is the case with Mr. Wright. And his is a pretty extreme example, partially, I think, because he was very susceptible and naive and able and really willing to believe so many different things, and without recognizing the power of his own belief. And so thanks to a doctor who is willing to go through and create quack medicine, we get this example of somebody who is, in a very documented case, like really undergoes a massive physiological change just because of his belief. What you believe to be true about your life is your experience of your life. And so in that sense, it can be called the truth. That doesn't mean it matches the actual reality as such, but as long as you believe it to be true, you'll experience it. That's why when you go to a movie and you sit in a movie and you identify with a character and you allow your mind to kind of like soak that in as if it's true, and you have what J.R.R. Tolkien called a willful suspension of disbelief, then all of a sudden you're in there and your body's reacting as if you're the one being chased with the knife, as if you're the one in the fight, as if you're the one that's being yelled at, instead of seeing that it's happening to someone else. And as a result, you go through emotional and physiological changes. You start crying. They're not happening to you. They're just lights on a screen, sound waves in the air, but you yourself have made them into something that is now producing an effect inside of your system. So if you don't believe in the placebo effect or the nocebo effect, just for a second, watch what happens to you when you watch a movie or when you read a news article. Anything that's happening to you in your life, you're creating that experience, not the circumstances. You're not always creating the circumstances, right? Other people contribute to that quite a bit, and so does the weather, and so does all this other stuff. But your experience is how you're putting together all of that circumstance in your own mind, and that's your experience of it. This is exceptionally powerful when you begin to be willing to challenge your assumptions, because most of the things that are controlling your life, addiction is forever, depression is forever, anxiety, I can't get rid of, I inherited this, it's a disease. All these things are actually not true. They're not factually true. They've never been found to be true in laboratories anywhere at all. They're all extrapolations, explanations, and ideas about life. But because a person believes them, suddenly they control how you think. This food is a superfood. It's going to make me healthy. So you start doing what? You buy the food. It's controlling your behavior. Then you worry when you don't have enough of it, and that controls your behavior. The fact is, when it comes to nutrition, there are so many different ways to fully nourish the human system. It's insane. And different cultures have done it in so many different ways over the course of human history. So to say there is one way and that this is the food, and if you don't get this, you're going to die. Sorry. That's marketers. That has nothing to do with reality, right? You're going to know what's good for you by learning to pay attention and throwing the assumptions out the window. Someone offers you a piece of information, including me, and it's not your job to believe it. It's your job to assess it, to use it, to test it out in your life and see what your body and your experience shows you about it. And you may find it's not useful right now, and you may find it's useful later, or you may find it's useful now and not useful later. You may find it's never useful, or you may find it's always useful, or any combination of those. That's okay. But then you're relying on your 9 senses and however many other senses there are, your own direct perception of life in order to finally make assessments instead of believing something else to be true. There are so many things that people have taught you from the time you've grown up that you've probably accepted as baseline reality, and you haven't even thought to question. Stress is a fact of life. Really? Really? Are you sure? Are you sure? Well, no, it's just that I get stressed. Do you get stressed, or do you stress yourself out? They're different. Yeah, she made me mad. Did she make you mad? Did she swim through the air and breathe some toxic chemical on you that changed your blood chemistry into one that is a match for madness? Did she inject something? Really, did she make you mad? Or did you make you mad and you just gave her all the credit? There are so many things that you probably haven't challenged in your life, assumptions that have been made that are not malicious assumptions. You're not a stupid person. You've taken what you've been given. But if you haven't been given an option that is more closely aligned to reality, then you just chose the best out of the options you were given. And all of them are wrong. Every word that comes out of a human's mouth, including my mouth, your mouth, everybody, is in a sense not the truth, because it's an attempt to take something, to take an experience and put it into a word and to pretend that that word is that experience. that the word tree is the tree. It's not. When I say tree, I'm thinking about an idea in my head. But if I really looked at the tree I was pointing to, every single one is different. Every single one is unique. Every single one is having a different experience and doing something different based on its environment and what's going on. And yes, some of them may run in similar patterns, but when I say tree, I miss the reality of the tree. Every concept you've ever been taught, whether it's a religious concept, an educational concept, a political concept, an economic concept, every single concept you've ever been taught is a story. It's an attempt to explain reality. And too often, it gets mistaken for reality. And as soon as your ideas become more important than reality, as soon as you believe the lie that Descartes himself, René Descartes himself put forward, that I think, therefore I am, I know I exist because I'm thinking, then suddenly you will herald your thoughts above reality. And the unfortunate thing about your thoughts is, one, they're only regurgitating the past. So if you want to go somewhere new, it's going to be really rough. Two, they're only based on the data that you've observed. So then they're not even regurgitating an active or an actual or an accurate account of the past, only a flawed perception of it or a limited perception of it. And three, as long as you're thinking, you're not perceiving. It's like trying to drive down the road with your eyes closed. You might be able to do it. You might succeed at getting to your destination, but nobody would call that an intelligent course of action. And everyone around you is in danger because you're closing your eyes. When you believe your thoughts about reality and your beliefs about reality above your own perceptions, well, some might call that faith. Some might call that faith. But it's also the gateway to all kinds of accidents. Thoughts and beliefs can be a way, like hypotheses. They're ways of feeling into it. This seems to be the case. I'm going to keep looking. But as soon as you say that your beliefs are something that you know, you've blinded your eyes. You've shut off your senses and your ability to see the world that's been created for you to experience. And as a result, you can experience what so many people experience, which is a negative experience of life, a nocebo, or a positive experience of life, a placebo, but both of them are psychologically created. Both of them are coming from the inside, and you're just missing the world on the outside. To be freed from that roller coaster requires perception. It requires training that perception. And unfortunately, there are not a lot of people in the world that I know of that are really working on enhancing that in a human being. But that is your ticket to freedom from me, from every authority, from every leader, from every parent, from everything. Not because they're bad people, but because it's time that because you have eyes, you start to look with your own eyes instead of looking with my eyes or looking with another leader's eyes or listen with my ears instead of your own ears. It's time that you start using the things that you've been given. You have them for a reason, and shutting them off and trusting in authority, well, it can lead you to great things. It really can, but it can also lead you down some really terrible rabbit holes, as many of you have experienced when you've trusted someone or trusted something or trusted a program and found that it didn't lead you where you wanted. I will never say that I have the answer for everyone. I'm simply sharing what I've seen work and inviting people to experience it so that they can decide for themselves. What I have discovered seems to work really, really well with a lot of people, both young and old. We had a 75-year-old at our last retreat, as well as a 13-year-old. We've seen it with men and women. We've seen it with blacks and whites. We've seen it with Asians and Hispanics. We've seen it with all kinds of different people from all walks of life. We've seen it from people from different countries. I've worked with people in Afghanistan, in China, in Europe, in Africa, in Canada, in South America, in Bolivia. Like, I've worked with people all over the place. And these things that I've found work with the human body. But you'll never know that until you try them for yourself and start to pay attention to what it's doing for you. And that's when the juice hits. That's when you realize, wow, this is actually changing things for me. And that's when your life starts to change and you become freed from the very assumptions and conclusions that have been keeping you in bondage. If you want help with that, if you want to come experience our programs, obviously, you know where to find us.
And that's it for today's Alive and Free podcast. If you enjoyed this show and want some more freedom bombs landing in your earbuds, subscribe right now at wherever you get your podcasts from. And while you're at it, give us a rating and a review. It'll help us keep delivering great stuff to you. Plus, it's just nice to be nice.
is thepodcastfactory.com.